All right, this is Storm over Asia. And the reason I'm working on this one, I don't have a World at War or the Gathering Storm. I'm not into that system. I've just never gotten into it for a couple of reasons. It looks to be, pretty complex. I already have several strat level games on World War II. And somehow I acquired a copy of this. It was sent to me, and I'm working on a vassal module. And when you're working on a vassal module, especially with a game of this complexity, it's useful to kind of have an idea of how the game works so that you get the module put together properly. So I've undertaken the project this month to learn how to play this game. And I got to tell you, this is a project. So the rulebook doesn't even tell you how many pages it is. There's no page numbers on it. It's really strange. It's a strange rulebook in a lot of ways. In some ways, it is a throwback to the old days of Avalon Hill. The rules are written in that very terse style. It is a 50-page document according to the PDF. So you got 50 pages of rules here. It's one map. It's the one map that made it look so playable to me. However, I got about 15 pages into this thing, and I'm like completely lost. There's stuff that just doesn't make sense. It was a real struggle to learn how to play this. Now, having said that, I got a little help online. A few people answered 2 questions that helped me unlock the mystery that I was wrestling with. I just couldn't get past one point because I wasn't understanding something. And in all fairness, there's no examples of play. Well, I shouldn't say there's no. There are occasionally tiny little examples in tiny little print that explain very obscure, esoteric things that could happen if, mind you, if you learn how to play this game. So I'm like, dude, this is like getting a dictionary to a foreign language, an exhaustive dictionary of a foreign language, and trying to learn how to speak that language. I mean, all the information's in here, but unraveling the mystery of it, there's got to be an easier way. All of that to say this. I've learned how to play the game, and it's nowhere near as complex as this rulebook makes it sound. The rulebook here, I think, is really useful for looking rules up. If you want to find a rule, it's pretty easy to reference this and find it because it's one massive outline. So finding stuff, really easy to do. However, learning it, they needed another document. I like how some game companies have written rules like this, and then they have like a full-blown tutorial. It's interactive. It teaches you how to play it as you go. I feel like that would have been a much better approach. Or at least have in the playbook some examples of play. Now, there is another document that's really useful that explains the game's components. I actually think I have it here. Yeah, the battle manual. Not as thick, maybe like 30 pages. And it explains what all the pieces are. There's a few missing bits, few counters that there's no explanation for, but I've been able to unravel the mystery of it. But it would have been nice to have some examples of play in this thing. Show us how the game works, for crying out loud. All right, but I figured out how to play it. I feel like that's an accomplishment. One other nitpick before I show you what's cool about the game is there's virtually no play aids. There's a play aid for diplomacy, which is really useful. Breaks down what you need for that particular sequence of the play. However, there is no play aid that shows you the sequence of play. You actually have to reference the rulebook. This rulebook's going to get worn out real quick if you're trying to learn how to play this game. So there's tons of charts in here, but they're buried in this document, which makes zero sense to me. So there it is. That's been my struggle, but I have learned how to play it. Let me break it down for you. Just a quick summary of what I've come to experience with this. So the object of the game is really to position your faction into the best possible place for fighting the Second World War in the Pacific Theater. The outcome of this game is meant to facilitate the setup of a world at war. So if you have the global game, playing this game will help you set up the Pacific side of that if you wanted to go with an alternate history what if kind of a style of play. Gathering Storm, I take it, does the same thing for Europe, albeit it's, according to this, Gathering Storm's a little bit more complex. So, and from what I heard in the comments, you probably have the same struggle learning. However, it does say that if you do learn how to play this game, you're going to pick up Gathering Storm quite a lot quicker. And I can see that. Once you get a feel for how the game works, everything's in here, and it's actually pretty easy to learn how to play. So how the game works is you have a huge deck of random events. There's different factions on here. The top of the cards here shows a random event that's global. It affects everything for that particular seasonal turn. The turns are seasonal, 4 turns to a year, starting in 1935. So you draw a random event that's going to affect the whole turn. Then each faction is going to get a random event. Japanese are going to have 3 different options on their random event that's going to affect either the economic or military side of things, research, or diplomacy. The other faction, either Great Britain or Russia, will have a card. So when the card is drawn, if Britain draws the card, it's got the Russian flag here. They got to give it to the Russian player, and vice versa. China will always get a card, and it's only going to have just that one option. And that random effect is going to affect one part of the sequence of play. If it's shaded in gray, then it's secret and only played when it's applicable. If it's not shaded, then it happens right away and everybody gets to see it. Now, the Japanese also draw a card from this deck here of random categories, and it's going to be one of those 3 random categories. And so whatever card they draw from this little deck is going to determine what part of the random event for that particular turn is going to be useful to them. They might even get a random event or a random card that allows them to select whatever category they want. It gives you a little more flexibility. So you got random events. The other thing that's going on with the game is you're trying to establish diplomatic control or military control over the different regions in China. China is not a viable nation state as of yet. So you have all these different Chinese segments, regions that you're trying to gain control over. The nationalists are trying to form a cohesive government. Japan's trying to take over slices of China. Russia's encroaching on it. And between the Russians and the nationalists, you have the Chinese Civil War portrayed in an abstract way. Britain doesn't really get involved over here. Britain's involved with Southeast Asia, which is all these other country tracks that you see around the board, and they and Japan are competing for influence in these particular areas. One of the things you're going to be doing in your turn is you're going to be developing technology that's going to impact the rest of the war. Now, if you're just playing this game and you have no intention of playing a World at War, this is a game in and of itself, and at the end of the turn track here, and once you reach the end of the game, 1940, then you'll evaluate how well you positioned your faction for fighting World War II, and you'll win points based on the technologies you developed, your diplomatic control or lack thereof, how cohesive your government is, how strong your military is, and so forth. And so you've got a finite number of resources that you're going to use to develop technology, and Japan has a huge amount that they can do. Lots of options. China's got fewer options. Britain's got fewer options. Russia has 0 options. There's not a whole lot for Russia to do in the game. And so if you're playing this in a 4-player game, playing the Russian side or the British side might be a little dull. I kind of feel like this plays better as a 2-player game with China and Japan competing against each other, in which case the Chinese player would have control over Great Britain and Russia as well. When I looked at the rules, one of the things I was a little concerned about is there is no United States. So the United States was hugely active in the Pacific in the 1930s. Despite the isolationist politics, it still was quite active diplomatically in China and elsewhere. The United States is abstracted in the game in terms of the number of ships that they're building. And so Japan, in order to keep a pace of things, has to build ships at a rate that can compete with the United States in order to preserve its military edge in this particular theater of the Pacific. And so there's going to be pressure on Japan to use its finite resources to build ships, build their land, their army, to get diplomatic influence in these areas, develop technologies. And the resources you're getting are kind of like op points. The term in the game is income. And so, but they function like op points. You get them for achieving different things, and different factions get them in different ways. And this is where a play aid would be hugely helpful. But once you see how it works a turn or two, you're going to get this really quick, and it works in an intuitive way. And so you're going to use these op points. And then you've also got these action tokens, and this is where you're going to divide up what am I going to do in the course of the turn. So early in the turn, you're going to take your op points, which are these tokens here with flags, and you're going to use them for different functions, and then you have to spend op points equal to the number on it. This is basically a bluff token here. This can only be used for ship. These are military counters, and they can be used diplomatically, but also they can be used militarily to do overt military acts of hostility in China and in Manchuria and Siberia. So the Russians and the Chinese, or Russians and Japanese, can actually fight skirmishes using those tokens. You have to manage your civil economy by taking your unemployed population, which is represented by idle factories in Japan, and converting them either to a military infrastructure or civilian infrastructure. And whichever you do is going to impact your internal stability and the cohesion of your government. So it sounds like a lot, but in reality, the turns actually work pretty quick. This is not a monster game. I feel like this can be played out in an afternoon by players that are competent with the rules. And so there is a really neat game here. It needs some tutorial or something to explain how this all works. All of that to say this, I did post some things to the effect that I am working on a vassal module. The module should be done in the next couple of weeks. It's getting really close, and it's gonna look really nice. It's gonna really help people be able to play the game. But there is a really cool design here. I feel like the design is solid. They just, if they could just put together a better way to present what's in here to the player, that would be huge. One of the other things that's going on is you have chaos in China. Each turn you got warlords that are going to show up. Cards can be drawn off of here at the end of the turn, and it's going to put a warlord token, which is like a fifth faction that's going to just sow chaos into China. And the same card can't be drawn 2 turns in a row, and so it's just kind of held aside until the next turn, then it gets shuffled in. You have purges in Russia. Military, in fact, Russia just spent a ton of their ops in order to build a military token, and then they lost it with a great purge by Stalin. But as these purges happens, it gradually forms a cohesive and strong Russia, which can be a threat to Japan later on in the game. And so that's one of the other things that's kind of going on. My impression of this, the game will not play well solitaire because there's a lot of things that you're going to be doing simultaneously and revealing things. There's a bluff element to the game. Having said that, the game's so stinking complex in some ways that I kind of feel like it can tell a story without me. I can still enjoy experiencing the model play itself out, even though I am privy to all the data. Let me put it that way. And so some players might enjoy that part of it. I think you could build a competent AI, kind of like what I did with, I think what I did with Navajo Wars would actually work as an AI to guide the allies if you wanted to play Japan in the Pacific, which would be kind of a cool thing. I might even tinker around with that because I'm fascinated by the model here. That's the only reason it's still on my table, because I was ready to just kick this thing to the curb earlier this week. But I am fascinated with the model, maybe even enough to pick up Gathering Storm and check it out. Not sure I'm ready to dive into a World at War, but this game almost makes me want to do that. So there is that element to it. So kind of a neat thing. The game is, because of the random things that's going to happen, the op points, there's going to be op points that are pulled randomly in addition to your ordinary income, and that's going to, it provides enough of a randomizer to the game to make every game show up a little bit different, and yet there is a predictability. It's not a total let's drive this thing off the rails kind of a thing. It's going to follow patterns that are historically reasonable, and yet it's going to differ somewhat, perhaps, than what historically happened. So that is my take on a Storm Over Asia, which is a World at War prequel. It is a game standalone by itself, but it's really meant to interface with and serve as a modified setup for the monster game, A World at War. I'm Joel Topp. I hope you enjoyed the video. Check out more from my channel, and I might do some more videos on this game or not. I am actually enjoying experiencing the model once I have learned how to play it.